Jerry, would you come and read our first lesson? You can bring family if you want.
First scripture lesson comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 3 through 4. I'm saying that slowly so you can find it because it's short. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead.
Jerry. Well, as a culture, we really love murder mysteries. Most of the stuff on television involves it in one way or another, evening TV for adults. Right behind romances, murder mysteries are top seller at the bookstore. So much that intrigues us about that, and even more when it's real life stuff. You know, I'm sure like you, or like me, you've been hearing a lot. Brian Koberger, who is now being found responsible for murdering young college students out in Idaho. I'm sure your news feed and radio shows are filled with news about Tyree Nichols, who was on the other end of murder, wrongfully treated, and as Sheree alluded to us, just a heartbreaking situation in Duxbury. Lindsay Clancy, who was responsible for the death of her young children. Murder is dramatic, it's intriguing, sometimes seems fascinating. It's also heartbreaking and tragic, and also human, isn't it? You know, Laura and I used to watch this show on BBC, Inspector Morris, who's a detective in Oxford. We've both spent a little bit of time in Oxford, so it's fun to catch a glimpse of the Thames or the Carfax Tower or All Saints on High Street, and of course the beautiful colleges there. It's intriguing. But at one point, Laura said, I'm tired of this. Really? A dramatic murder every week in Oxford. How can this be, you know? Well, I guess you don't watch TV for the realistic end of things, maybe. But it made me wonder, how realistic are the murder shows and kind of the murder rate? So I did a little bit of research and found out this, that of all people, Angela Lansbury, up in Cabot Cove, Maine, has the highest murder rate at 143 per 100,000. Pretty amazing. And then not far after her, Kenneth Branagh's Wallander over in Sweden. It's a little darker show than Angela Lansbury, 110 per 100,000. So I was wondering, well, what about Inspector Morris's Oxford? What's the rate there? And I learned it was really only 3 per 100,000. So, Well, what does that mean, actually? What's the context? So let me ask you to guess this. What do you think the murder rate per 100,000 is in our beloved country, USA? Any sense? Out of 100,000 folks, how many died homicide? Any ideas? 7.5. 7.5. Yeah. Twice as much as you're more likely to die of homicide in the U.S. than in Inspector Morris's Oxford. That's kind of sobering, isn't it? Well, we love murder mysteries, but actually there is no real mystery about murder. They are all kind of banal. They grow out of such common, sad human activity. Our own failure to live up to who we are as children of God. Well, today's passage records the first murder in the biblical narrative, and it's a pretty familiar passage. Both us churchgoers and even non-churchgoers know this story. But I want you to listen as I read it today and try to insert yourself right into that story. Take the perspective either as a detective watching from the sidelines or as one of the characters within Listen again carefully. It's Genesis chapter 4, beginning at verse 1. Adam made love to his wife Eve. Sounds like an HBO story, but it's not where it goes. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. She gave birth to Cain. And she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother, Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. And in the course of time, Cain brought the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering. But on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. And the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what is right, well, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must not let it rule over you." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother and killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," Cain replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground, and now you are under a curse. You're driven from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence, and he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Well, it is absolutely amazing how quickly things deteriorate. I'm not talking about my middle-aged eyes. It's this. We start Genesis with this beautiful structure of creation in Genesis 1, in such a lush and verdant garden in chapter 2 and 3. And that beautiful place then is so quickly poisoned by the rebellious act of Adam and Eve in chapter 3, and then all the way down to fratricide just a couple verses later. Man, things fall apart. A beautiful, well-ordered world. You know, this is the third time we're talking about these encounters with God in the Old Testament, and the first 2 that we've looked at have included a bit of an interview, questions being asked between humans and God. Job asking God questions, and then God turning around and asking Job questions. Or last week when we looked at Adam and Eve, God strolls in the garden and he starts asking questions. Where are you? What have you done? Well, here we get multiple interviews with God and humans here. And the first one is a kind of intervention. Did you notice that? When God first comes to Cain, he says, "Hey, Cain, why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast?" Well, Cain is downcast and angry because he's jealous of his younger brother. Probably a twin. The way that construction is written, and his brother Cain, or Abel, it probably is that they were twins. Cain came first and then Abel right after. They're close, like all siblings. That closeness can cause tensions at times. We don't know what Cain's offense was. Maybe he wasn't living right somehow. Maybe he was being greedy. Maybe he was hoarding food instead of sharing it with others. Maybe he lacked gratitude. Maybe he thought that somehow all the fruits of his labor, he deserved every bit of it, because as if he had made the garden himself rather than simply cared for it. Maybe he disrespected his parents. We don't know. But there's something in his actions and his attitude that were not in line with what God willed for him, desired for him. It gave birth to envy. That envy gave rise to anger. So God intervenes, comes in, says, hey, listen, this is verse 6. Let me read it again. He says, why are you angry? Why are your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what's right, well, watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, and it seeks to have you. Don't let it get the upper hand, Cain. God gives Cain an opportunity for a timeout, to pause, to think, to reflect on what he's feeling and why he's feeling it. And I wonder how many times does God, through His Spirit, speak to us, intervene with us, nudge our conscience just a little bit, and say, hey, what are you feeling, and why are you feeling that way? How are you acting? Are you acting right? If you act right, surely you'll be accepted. How many times do we turn away from that? Do we plug our ears? Do we turn to diversions or distractions, constant input? You know, I know one of my bad habits is when I jump in the car, I punch the radio button. Keeps me from thinking too much. For you, it might be scrolling through the feeds on your phone, or playing games, or picking up the phone to call somebody. Too afraid that if you sit and listen quietly, you may not like what God hears, or what you hear God say. Or perhaps some anxiety or fear that you may not hear God say anything, and you feel just alone. But how many times then, also like Cain, do we hold on to resentment, or anger, or envy, or discouragement, or anxiety, or pride, until sin is no longer crouching at the door, but leaps right in, gets the upper hand, and our freedom to act now is gone, because sin is reigning in us. Well, back to the story here. Cain fails to take God's advice. God, like a supportive parent or an encouraging coach, gave him another way out, but he didn't take it. He follows through with his action. It says this: he had his brother out in the field and he killed him. And now God comes interviewing again like a detective. The Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? Cain has a guilty conscience. He becomes defensive, which is a common reaction for us too, isn't it? Before God says another word, he seeks to excuse himself, and he lies. I don't know where he is. What? Am I his babysitter? You expect me to be his keeper? Well, he knows the answer to both of those things. He knows where his brother is, and he knows what his obligation is to his brother. Let me make a side note here. Just two quick things. One is just fascinating, I think. The Hebrew scripture is really playful in its language. And it's most likely, there's this, it says, after God talks to Cain the first time, that Cain says he spoke to his brother Abel. Says, let's go to the field. Well, that little phrase, let's go to the field, isn't in the earliest manuscripts. And that phrase, he spoke to him, looks like it might be a corruption of he eyed him. He watched him. There's just one letter difference in the Hebrew there. And it looks like maybe saying, and he watched him. Which, if so, then this would be a very common kind of Hebrew thing, that at first he's eyeing his brother, he's watching his brother, he's waiting for an opportunity, and when they're in the field together, he thinks he's not in God's presence, he kills Abel. And then when God shows up, he says, what? Am I a guy who watches it? Am I what? Am I supposed to watch my brother? Am I supposed to eye my brother? Kind of a playful thing there. But the second observation is this. And I want to start very simply by asking the question, what's wrong with murder? I mean, it's in the Ten Commandments, but they don't exist at this point in the story. So really, what's wrong with it? Well, an obvious answer is it deprives somebody else of life. It's the ultimate act of theft. You take from somebody what is not yours to take, their very life and freedom. That's true. But also, in the Hebraic scripture, it's because of this. It's not just offense against the individual, but it's an offense against the community and an offense against God. A personal violation, yes, but it harms the community. It takes away from the community something that the murderer has no right to take. This is true even in cases of suicide. Our lives are not our own to dispose of because they don't fully belong to just us. I've had the awesome responsibility of working with families in the wake of the suicide deaths of young people. And I can tell you, the family would say, their life was not theirs to take. She belonged to us. Yeah, I lost a dear friend to suicide, a colleague. And then some of my response, even in my grief, was anger. Larry, what were you thinking? What were you doing? That was not your action to take. You belong to all of us. You know, Christianity, unlike other religions or other views of the world, hold together two truths. And it holds them together in beautiful tension and beautiful harmony. And one is this, that we are our own person. We have distinct personalities, eternally so, I think. And that's what makes it possible for us to genuinely love one another, because others are other. We're not the same. We're our own people. God made us that way. It's beautiful. The other truth is this, that we are who we are, ever, only, and always in relationship to one another. That is, ontologically, we're not just individuals. Our lives only exist, our lives only make sense in community, in relationship to other ones. We're built for community, and it's only in community that we become our full, unique, individual selves. Those two things held together. Eastern religions tend to forget the first half of that. Everything is all one. And in the end, it's as if all material, all creation could be thrown in a blender and smoothed out till it's all one monad, all the same kind of thing. And actually, what we think of as distinctions between us, that's an illusion. Maya is the word, the deceit. And if you get over that deceit, then you'll see that everything is fine. You can't really commit murder, because how can you kill something that's not there? It's kind of like a little ball of mercury. You can smash it and it'll break it, but then it'll come back together. You can't harm. The other half of that coin is you can't really love another. There are no others to love. You can only love yourself. And then you just kind of accept it for what it is, and you can do no harm. You can do no wrong. Everything is everything. Unlike Buddhism, Confucianism, Christian faith insists that we are different and distinct and have unique value as individuals. Thus, we're able to love one another, and we are genuinely able to harm one another. The other side, the thing that our culture, Western individualism, gets wrong is this. It overemphasizes the individual. It forgets that our lives are not fully our own. They only make sense in community. They only hold meaning in community. You know, we've seen in recent years a lot of public protests in response to wrongful deaths. A lot of them. You know, I think going back just a couple years, the Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of George Floyd's death. Or over in Iran, the death of Masha Amini, who died in police custody. Or in China in recent months, when 10 people were wrongly killed in an apartment fire because of COVID restrictions that kept them trapped inside. In all of these situations, all these public protests, we see people speaking out because they know in their gut that those deaths are their concern. It's a matter that matters to them. That it was wrong, not just because it violated the rights of that individual, because it hurt the community, a violation of the community. And yet, when those very people on the streets protesting make sense of their feelings, they use an impoverished language that resorts only on individual rights. Eastern religion, Western secularism, both get this thing wrong, but Christianity holds those twin truths together. We're individual, and we belong to each other. Well, let's get back to the story here. This time, when God speaks, he has another set of questions. Where is Abel? And he asks the same question that he asked of Eve in chapter 3. What have you done? What have you done? Now, we ask that kind of question sometimes, not because we don't know the answer. God knows the answer. But he wants to declare the unacceptableness of this. What you have done is unacceptable. And he maybe wants to shake Cain. Awake. Look what you have done. See what you have done. I'm asking you the question so that you will say it yourself. You'll name it and recognize it and see what's there. What have you done? Well, listen, your brother's blood even cries out to me from the ground. So now here come the consequences. You were driven from the ground, which opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood. And when you work the ground, it will no longer yield crops. You'll be a restless wanderer on this earth. Well, the trouble that Cain was in before this dirty deed is now multiplied. Remember, he's a farmer, and he loses his vocation. He's driven from the ground. His farming will not produce worthwhile fruit anymore. God is a God of mercy. Notice Cain complains, "Oh, this is more than I can bear. You're driving me from the land. I'm losing my vocation. This is the thing I love, making the plants produce beautiful fruit." And he also says this, "And I will be hidden from your presence." But isn't that exactly what he himself sought out? A field where no one was looking, where no one could see. He hid himself from God's presence. And now he feels the weight of wishing for that. Because really wants is not to be hidden. He wants to be known. He wants to be seen. He wants to be accepted. He wants to do work that matters. He wants to have some fruit to which to contribute to his community. Anyone who sees me is going to kill me. And God says, no, I won't let that happen. I like the way Fred Buechner interprets what happens here. He says this, that when Cain complained to God, God gave him some kind of severe facial twitch, which marked him as the sort of man you don't kick because he's already down. And thus he ensured Cain a long life with which to remember his act. I'm not sure what that means, God put a mark on him. But I don't think it means this, that God set him out as a tough thug, don't mess with Cain, so he knows how to kill people in secret, so don't touch him. Nor do I think he put a seal on him and said, "This is my special one." No. He did something to him that would make people avoid him. And maybe it was pity. Oh, here's a guy that it would just be, I can't be angry with him. You just have to be sorry for him. So he lived a long life. Well, what does all this mean to us? What do we do with this story? Murder is bad for the victim, and it's bad for the perpetrator, and it's bad for the community. Indeed. That's right. Like God said, he advised Cain, do what is right. And so we should do that. Do what is right. Just yesterday morning on Weekend Edition, I heard a woman named Connie Hernandez. She lives out in Goshen, California, and she was thinking about the death of one of her dear friends who was murdered, Rosa Perez. Rosa was a 72-year-old grandmother, You might have heard about this. It was not just Rosa, but her son and her granddaughter and a great-grandson, and also another spouse. They were all killed execution style by gang members. Her granddaughter was only 15 or 16 years old, rather, and she had a 10-month-old infant who was killed. These things happened just days before the killings also at Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. Murder seems to be everywhere. But Connie Hernandez said this. She said this death, this killing, this murder was a wake-up call. And what was it a wake-up call to? Well, she quotes God. Get right. Do good. Isn't that something? She uses those exact same words. Do right. Do good. Be good to your neighbors, the people you know. We have to work to know each other again. Well, okay. Do right. Do good. We can accept that and still just be good humanists, right? What does Jesus have to say about all this? What does it mean for Christians to affirm this kind of stuff? What's the lesson for us? And we first must look at what Jesus himself said about murder. You'll find it in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says this. Now you've heard it said by people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you this, anyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And again, anyone who says to his brother or sister, Raka, or that is, you fool, is answerable to the court. Anyone who says right out, you fool, they're in danger of hellfire. Oh, what does Jesus say about murder? Well, he does kind of like a windshield wipe. Clean your glasses. This is what it's really talking about. It's not just the act, but it's what gives rise to the act, the condition of your heart that matters. Just as God intervened or tried to intervene with Cain, why are you angry? Why are you downcast? Murder doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of our heart. Or, according to Inspector Atticus Punt of the Magpie murders, there's only 4 reasons, 4 motivations for murder: fear, anger, envy, and desire. All movements of our heart. Well, how do we avoid inordinate fear or anger or envy or desire? They don't occupy our hearts full time, although maybe for some folks they do, but certainly they're there regularly. Some of us are more susceptible to some things than others. Fear or anxiety, anger or frustration, jealousy, envy, or inordinate desire or lust. Those things grow up, don't they, like little weeds. And we can play whack-a-mole or pull a pear or something where you pluck it out, but what happens? It grows back again. Jesus seems to lay on us an obligation that's impossible to keep. How can I have a heart that is never touched with fear or anxiety or anger or envy or desire? How can I not? It seems impossible. Right? He makes it even harder for us. But then here's the other thing that Jesus offers. There's this remarkable connection to the life he lived and the way that he died. Jesus himself was murdered, willingly allowing it to happen to him. He becomes the victim of human sin. He absorbs the cost in his own body of our own rebellion. He becomes its victim. There, he doesn't just say, we don't just have God saying, don't do this thing, it's wrong, it harms the community. But he enters the community and absorbs the wrong done himself, dies on a cross. God says, I love you. I love all of you. Don't kill each other. But since you seem incapable of acting like children of God, then I'm going to put myself there to bear the brunt of it, to absorb the cost. And in so doing, mysteriously, he opens a new way forward for us. We're not caught by that path. We don't have to walk it. something new is opened up. And this is where Christians differ from just good humanists. We believe that there really is something at work, not just in Jesus as a good moral teacher, but Jesus as the incarnate God who changes the reality, makes it possible for us to have new hearts, hearts that are washed and set anew, and by His Spirit's continued presence and work in us, to continue to be freed from those things that lead to harmful deeds. This is the way the Apostle Paul put it. I find that there is this law at work within me. Although I want to do good, evil's right there with me all the time. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I also see this other dynamic at work. It's raging war against the law of my mind. It's making me a prisoner to the law of sin. What a wretched one I am. Who will rescue me from this body that's subject to death? Oh, but thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ. Wow. New life on offer. Fear, anger, envy, desire can be rooted out at the cross. It's Christ's new life lived within us. And this is the good news, that in Jesus Christ the whole human race gets a new start, a new way to be. He is the second Adam. He doesn't perpetuate the sins of our ancestors, but He bears those sins in His body and the consequences, so that forgiveness and grace and mercy might be ours. And that's some of what lies behind this powerful symbol of communion that we celebrate this morning, where it's an invitation to take into our life the life of Christ. Let it grow within us so we can be transformed from the inside out. Just as Jesus took into Himself our own failures, our faults, our ignorance, our rebellions, our sin, so we too take into ourselves the newness of life from the resurrected Christ. Let's celebrate communion together. Let me just say a few words about it before we do. Jesus gave us this as both a representation of a reality that's already here, our belonging to God through Christ and our belonging to one another through His Spirit. And it's a way to strengthen that reality, to reaffirm and to participate more deeply in it in a way that is mystical, but that is alive by the power of His Spirit. So we come together, we remind ourselves of Christ's death, and we also look forward to that time when the promised fruit of that resurrection fills all of the cosmos. But let's begin the prayer of confession, acknowledging that as we come to this, we do so with dirty hands and guilty hearts. I invite you to find in your bulletin the prayer of confession. And as you are able to read it and confess it with integrity, let's read along together. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against You in thought and word and deed by what we have done and what we have left undone. We are truly sorry, Lord, and we have not loved our neighbor as ourselves. We are truly sorry, and we humbly repent. For the sake of Your Son, Jesus Christ, have mercy on us. Forgive us, that we may delight in Your will and walk in Your ways to the glory of Your name. Amen. And indeed, Jesus invites anyone who would walk in His ways to the glory of His name to participate in this celebration. And if that's your intent, then I invite you to come forward. I didn't do this ahead of time, but I'll ask a couple of deacons to come and distribute the elements. Laura, would you like to join Dan up front? It's non-alcoholic juice and gluten-free bread. So hopefully that will not pose a barrier to anyone.